The biggest domino in terms of the NFL head coaching cycle has finally fallen with Ben Johnson going to the Chicago Bears. Now, Johnson had interviews with multiple teams until he decided to sign with the Chicago Bears. Up until the point New England signed Mike Vrabel to be their head coach, I think Ben Johnson was probably one of the top candidates for that head coaching vacancy. And the Las Vegas Raiders were looking for finally the head coach that could bring them back to the glory days. And now he's in Chicago, and now he has an infrastructure around him where he has a potential franchise quarterback in Caleb Williams, a number one receiver in DJ Moore, young pieces on an offense like Cole Kmet, like Roma Dunze, and he has a defense that is solid enough to where if offensively they finally get it right, this could be a team that is pushing for NFC North contention. There's an obvious track record with Ben Johnson in his 3 years as the offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions. And you don't really have to just look at the 3 years. You also have to look at the year before Ben Johnson took over in 2021 when he was on the team as an offensive quality control coach as well as a tight ends coach. The offense for Detroit in 2021 with the same quarterback in Jared Goff, with Amon-Ra St. Brown in his rookie season, and TJ Hawkinson and Josh Reynolds and DeAndre Swift. Offensively, this team was not very good. They were in the bottom of the league in terms of their net yards per passing attempt, their rushing attempts, their scoring, their yardage. They turned the ball over too much. This was an offense that just wasn't very efficient until Ben Johnson took over. And then you look in 2022, immediately after Ben Johnson takes over, you're looking at top 5 rankings in scoring, total yardage, and in the top 10 in terms of passing yards, rushing yards, turnovers. They were the first in the league in terms of not turning the ball over. So you can see there's an obvious link between the Detroit Lions offensively becoming a more efficient group after Ben Johnson took over. And it all culminated in 2024, where the Lions were first in scoring, second in total yardage, second in passing yards, sixth in rushing yards. They scored on almost 52% of their drives last year, which is an insane number. And they just offensively were better than anybody else's unit. And I know in the playoffs what that looked like, but I think that's a bigger indictment on the Detroit Lions defense and their injury issues that they had more than what they had going on offensively. And a bit of that, the turnover issues with Jared Goff. Something that is somewhat interesting to remember about the Ben Johnson head coaching cycle last year and culminating this year with his signing in Chicago is how his interview process went last year and how the process between him and the Washington Commanders went last year. Before the Commanders signed Dan Quinn to be their head coach and Cliff Kingsbury to be their offensive coordinator, there was a really good chance that Ben Johnson was going to be filling both of those roles last year. But then the story broke sometime, in the middle of last year after the head coaching cycle had worked through and the Commanders got Dan Quinn and got Cliff Kingsbury and Ben Johnson went back to Detroit. There's the story about how Ben Johnson didn't want the Commanders, if he was going to take the head coaching position, he didn't want the Commanders front office and ownership group to take Jaden Daniels with the number 2 pick. He wanted to stick with Sam Howell at quarterback, and he wanted to implement his offense that way. And I think it's pretty obvious to say that Ben Johnson would have been wrong. Ben Johnson, he probably would have been fired after 1 year with Washington. If he would have told them that in the interview process, that he wanted to stick with Sam Howell instead of Jaden Daniels, and then everything worked out the same exact way. Sam Howell plays like a backup quarterback with the Washington Commanders, and Jaden Daniels goes to, let's just say, New England or any other place and ends up winning Rookie of the Year like he's going to this year. Ben Johnson would have been fired immediately. And I guess that's something to highlight as a good and a bad. You highlight it as a bad because you think, maybe he doesn't know it all, you know? Um, but you highlight it as a good and saying, it just wasn't the right time for Ben Johnson last year, and it wasn't the right situation for him to go to Washington. Because in the first place, if he wasn't going to like the rookie quarterback coming in, if he didn't like the skill set of Jaden Daniels, that's not like it was a very uncommon opinion of Jaden Daniels before he had this rookie season. And, if he struggles in his second or third year, there's going to be naysayers about him again as well. And so, with Chicago, he obviously has to like the quarterback. He obviously has to like the skill group. Only time is going to tell if this hire is actually going to be good for Chicago or not. Only time is going to tell if the Chicago Bears are going to be able to use Ben Johnson to get back to the playoffs, to get back to any sort of notoriety in the NFL. And they have a good team in Chicago. They have a very talented team. They're a running back and an offensive line away probably from getting back to contention. And I think, Ben Johnson was there for the 2 years in Detroit where Matt Patricia and Darrell Bevel were the head coach before Dan Campbell got there. And so I think he's seen a much uglier situation than Chicago is in right now. And him, alongside Dan Campbell and Aaron Glenn, they really turned around that team from a personnel and team style way. I just think that the mindset that those three guys brought collectively to that team was a major reason why they had an overhaul in terms of their winning percentage, in terms of their play style, in terms of how we think about them. And there's a very good chance that he does that with Chicago. They're going to need a few other coaches and a few other players to really flesh out that whole entire squad. But hiring Ben Johnson, I do think, is a step in the right direction.